In May 2026, the Victorian Government confirmed that land tax revenue is now forecast to hit $6.5 billion this financial year alone, growing at 5% annually through to 2029. And right now, across Melbourne, thousands of investors are not waiting around to feel the full weight of that number. They are listing their properties, fast, in some cases at prices they would never have accepted 2 years ago. According to the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, 22.1% of investors reported selling at least one property in Melbourne over the last 12 months. That is the highest sell-down rate of any capital city in the country. Brisbane came in second at 19.7%. So the question is, what exactly is pushing them out the door? And what does it mean for buyers, renters, and everyone else watching this market right now? Let's break it down.
To understand what's happening today, you have to go back to May 2023. That's when the Victorian Government, sitting on roughly $31.5 billion in COVID-era debt, announced a plan to claw back that money through property taxes. The headline change was this: the land tax threshold, the point at which an investment property starts getting taxed, was slashed from $300,000 down to just $50,000. For properties held inside a trust or company structure, it went even lower, down to $25,000. On top of that, the government layered in what they called the COVID Debt Repayment Levy, a flat surcharge added directly onto existing land tax bills. This levy is legislated to stay in place until June 2033. That's not a typo. Investors are looking at 7 more years of this. The government expected the changes to affect around 860,000 Victorian property investors. Of those, 380,000 had never paid land tax before in their lives. Overnight, they were in the system. Now here's where it really stinks. For a typical Melbourne investor, someone with a single investment property in a middle-ring suburb with a land value around $500,000, the annual tax bill jumped by several $1,000s per year. In many cases, that wiped out most or all of the net rental yield. And in 2026, those bills are still coming. The 2026-27 state budget, handed down on May 5th, confirmed no relief. The COVID levy stays, the thresholds stay, the rates stay. One Melbourne-based property firm summed it up simply: the changes fundamentally altered the economics of holding investment property in Victoria.
Now, on top of everything already happening with land tax, from January 1, 2026, a whole new layer kicked in, and it is hitting investors with vacant or underdeveloped properties particularly hard. It's called the Vacant Residential Land Tax, or VRLT. Here's how it works. If a residential property in Victoria is vacant for more than 6 months in any calendar year, the owner now gets hit with a 1% annual tax on the property's capital improved value. Not the land value, the full property value. And it's progressive. Leave it vacant a second year, and the rate goes to 2%. A third year, it goes to 3%. To give you a real example, a vacant apartment in Melbourne's CBD worth $900,000 triggers a $9,000 VRLT bill in the first year. That's before any other land tax. Before 2026, this tax only applied to specific inner Melbourne suburbs. From January 1, 2026, it now applies to every single piece of residential zoned land across all of Victoria: Brunswick, Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo. It doesn't matter where the property is. If it's sitting empty, the clock is running. And there's another new rule that directly affects anyone trying to sell. Since contracts signed after January 1, 2024, sellers are now prohibited from passing their land tax bill on to buyers at settlement for any property sold under $10.7 million. That's almost every residential sale in Melbourne. What that means in practice, a vendor who listed their property in January 2026 and settles in May has to pay the entire 2026 land tax bill, even though they only owned the property for 5 months of the year. Buyers get a benefit. Sellers absorb the full cost regardless of timing. One property accounting firm described it as a hidden exit tax for anyone trying to get out of the market mid-year.
So what is all of this actually doing to Melbourne's property market right now? New listings in Melbourne are currently running approximately 12% above the 5-year average, according to recent market data from Dingle Partners. There's more stock hitting the market than the city has seen in years, and a meaningful portion of it is coming from investors who are simply done. According to CoreLogic's Home Value Index, released May 1, 2026, Melbourne dwelling values fell 0.6% in April alone and are down 1.5% for the quarter. The median dwelling value sits at $822,969. Houses have taken the harder hit, down 2.1% over the quarter. Melbourne is still 2.3% below its March 2022 peak. Meanwhile, in regional Victoria, the picture looks similar. The land tax threshold cut pushed holding costs up by roughly $1,200 to $1,500 per year for investors owning a single property in places like Ballarat and Bendigo. Properties where land values of around $250,000 used to attract zero land tax. Now they don't, and many of those investors have decided to sell. One mortgage broker in regional Victoria noted the surge publicly. The land tax hike has flooded the market with established homes in regional hubs. Prices are softening. Buyers are getting leverage they haven't had in years. On the rental side, and this is the uncomfortable irony, the investor exodus is making things worse for tenants, not better. Melbourne's citywide rental vacancy rate is sitting around 1.5%, already tight territory. In some suburbs, it has dropped to 0.9%. Rents have risen over 20% in some areas over the past 12 months. The government was trying to free up housing supply. Instead, with fewer investors in the market and new construction slowing down, ABS data shows Victorian dwelling completions fell 25.5% in the June 2025 quarter compared to the year prior. Renters are competing harder for fewer homes. People queuing to inspect rentals, tenants offering above asking price. That is happening in 2026 Melbourne.
There's one more piece of this that doesn't get talked about enough, and it has hit Airbnb hosts and short-stay investors directly. From January 1, 2025, Victoria introduced a 7.5% short-stay levy on all bookings under 28 days. Every Airbnb stay, every stays booking, 7.5% goes straight to the state government. That continues through 2026 with no sign of changing. For a host earning, say, $40,000 a year from short-stay rentals, 100 nights at $400 a night, that's a $3,000 levy bill they weren't paying before. And if that same host leaves the property vacant for any reason for more than 6 months, they're also now on the hook for the Vacant Residential Land Tax. So you're being taxed when you rent it out short-term, and you're being taxed if you leave it sitting empty. The window of profitability for a lot of short-stay investors has gotten very narrow very fast. Owners' corporations, basically the building management bodies for apartment complexes, were also given new powers to ban short-stay listings in a building with a 3/4 majority vote. That has already started happening in some Melbourne apartment buildings. The result? More short-stay properties are being converted to long-term rentals or being listed for sale entirely.
So here's where things stand right now, in May 2026. The Victorian Government is collecting $6.5 billion in land tax this financial year. The COVID Debt Levy isn't going anywhere until 2033. The vacant land tax now covers all of Victoria, and sellers can no longer offset their tax bill onto buyers. Investors are selling. In Melbourne, in Ballarat, in Bendigo, the data shows it clearly, the highest sell-down rate of any capital city in Australia. Buyers, particularly first home buyers and owner-occupiers, are finding more choice in the market than they have in years. Prices in some pockets have softened,
negotiating power has shifted. But for renters, the people this policy was partly designed to help, the story is more complicated. Fewer investors means fewer rental properties, and right now, Melbourne's rental market is tight. Rents are rising, and vacancy rates are near historical lows. The government set out to repay COVID debt and push idle properties back into use. Whether that plan is working the way they intended, that's a conversation Melbourne is still having. What's not up for debate is this: the numbers are moving, listings are up, and investors are making decisions they didn't expect to be making this quickly. Everyone's watching what happens next.